Chapter 17. Duncan lay still, waiting. They had watched the camp for a full day, and had discovered that the camp of the Goblins and their soldier boys was not well stocked. Throughout the day, boys would wander out of the camp into the woods to collect firewood. Sometimes they didn't even bring their swords, so it offered the perfect opportunity. They hadn't come up with any brilliant plans, so they had settled on a simple one. They had found a decent-sized branch in the wood, and they would hit an unsuspecting boy with it, then tie him up and drag him away. When they were somewhere safe, Duncan would try to free the boy from the goblin magic, as he had released his friends. One boy, whom they had seen twice already that day, had taken the same route to the same area to search for wood. Also, he had come without a weapon. He was the best target by far, so Duncan and his friends had agreed to set an ambush for him. Duncan lay ready, holding a hefty tree branch while watching the boy approach. Their target was bigger than any of the three boys, and older, perhaps 15 or 16 years old. Worryingly, the boy had a sword with him this time, but it was sheathed at the boy's waist, and he looked relaxed as he wandered towards his favoured spot. It was evening already, and the boy might not make another trip. Duncan didn't want to wait another day, and resolved to continue with the plan, despite the older boy being armed. The boy stopped where expected, then began searching the ground for dead branches, humming calmly as he did. He didn't appear wary, and wasn't looking around. When the boy was facing away, Duncan rose from his hiding place and crept forward, sneaking up behind the boy. Finn and Charlie were hidden nearby. Finn had his spear ready to serve as backup, while Charlie had the rope prepared to rush forward and tie up their prey. When Duncan was nearly in striking range, he trod on a twig. In the quiet of the wood, the snapping of the twig sounded like a thunderclap. The soldier boy spun in surprise. His eyes went wide in shock and confusion when he saw Duncan. Panicked, Duncan swung his branch wildly back and forth. The first blow caught the boy's shoulder, causing him to step back. Duncan stepped with him, still swinging. Another blow caught the boy in the stomach, making him double over as the air was knocked from him. But then he found some space, got a hand to his sword and drew it. Duncan looked at the length of sharpened metal before him, and felt frozen with fear. He knew he should run away, or at least draw his own sword that hung limply in its sheath. But instead he stood, terrified, sure the blade would be thrust into him at any moment. The death blow did not come. Instead, the boy looked at him with stunned confusion, seeming to struggle over what to do. As it occurred to Duncan that perhaps the boys had been ordered by the goblins not to fight amongst themselves, the bewildered boy collapsed to the ground in a heap. Finn stood behind him holding his spear, having just hit the boy over the head with the haft. Charlie was there with the rope almost immediately. Getting back to their plan, they rolled the boy over, tied his hands behind his back and then put a few loops around his ankles to prevent him from escaping. As soon as the boy was tied, and Duncan was recovering from his terror, the friends began dragging the larger boy through the woods, further away from the camp. There had been fairly little noise, and Duncan hoped that he had not been heard from the camp, but they would retreat further away anyway. After they had dragged him through the mud streams and over tree roots for over 15 minutes, the boy began to stir, and then wriggle semi-consciously. They had no choice but to stop. Suddenly Charlie leapt into action, grasping for his last length of rope, explaining, "We should have gagged him! Quick, before he starts calling for help!" But Duncan wasn't so sure. The captured boy had opened his eyes and was looking at Duncan, their eyes fixed. He was not shouting out, despite not being gagged. Taking a chance, Duncan spoke first to Charlie. "Wait, I think maybe we don't need to gag him." Then, to the boy at his feet, "My name is Duncan. I believe I have the ability to free you of the goblin's magic, and I would like to try." The boy continued to look at him, not speaking, but something had changed. A new look had appeared in those eyes, a spark of hope. He looked like he wanted to speak, but was struggling against something. Magic, Duncan knew. "I don't know how long it will take. More than a minute? Less than an hour? I hope. It will be easier if you don't move." Still no words, but perhaps the faintest flicker of a smile. More importantly, still no screams for help. Duncan sat down next to the boy. With the hand that wore the ring, he gripped the other boy's wrist and began to concentrate. He had been so tired last time that the memory of it was hazy, and at first he wasn't sure how to begin. He imagined a void of nothingness, and where his hand reached out, a wall seemed to appear. "Yes," he remembered, "a walled prison, holding their mind. I must break it." This wall was different, though. It seemed less well built, or perhaps just older, or both. But there were many cracks. It was like it had been built by a less skilled worker. Perhaps it had been a different goblin that had cast the spells on this boy. Or maybe it was the same goblin, Pelkar, but when he had been less practiced at the spell. Either way, there seemed many more places that Duncan could begin working. He felt in greater detail, making his imaginary self smaller in order to better inspect the magical prison. Before, it had been like a single wall with a couple of points that were thinner or weaker. This was more like a wall of bricks. Perhaps he didn't need to smash the wall, maybe he just needed to remove a few bricks. So he began. With his mind forming a wedge shape, he jammed it between some of the blocks and wiggled. The gap became bigger. It felt so much easier this time. Before long, the brick felt loose, but Duncan couldn't work out how to grip it to pull it out. Instead, he spent a couple of minutes making some of the surrounding bricks loose too. Then he reformed the shape of his mind from a small wedge into a hammer. Then with all his concentration he smashed the hammer into the center of the loose collection of bricks. Those bricks disappeared, and with that, the magic that held the wall together seemed to dissipate. The other bricks began to tumble, then they just started to crumble, fading into nothing. Within a few seconds of that single easy crash of his mind against the wall, there was nothing left in the void, except a boy that looked joyful in his freedom. Duncan relaxed his mind and opened his eyes. "Thank you, Duncan," said the boy, still tied up but with a huge grin on his face. "Thank you so much. You cannot understand what you've done for me. My name is Sam, and I will forever owe you everything and anything." Duncan wasn't sure how to respond, but Charlie interrupted. "Is it done? Is he... Can we trust him?" "Yes," answered Duncan. "Untie him. He's one of us now."